The smell reached Yuan Kai before the sound did. Cordite and something older underneath it, something organic, like the inside of a wound left open too long in the cold. She pressed her back against the bulkhead and let the vibration of the deck tell her what her eyes couldn't. 3 of them moving in the corridor below. The heavy tread of the Voth exosuits was unmistakable, a 6-limbed gait that rattled the ship's bones with every step, and she had lived inside those bones long enough to know the difference between a patrol and a hunt. They were hunting. She breathed through her nose, slow. The breathing technique her Sifu had called the ghost breath, back when she was 11 years old, and learning to hold a horse stance in the cold courtyard behind his clinic. "You are not there," he had said. "The air moves through you. You leave no shape in the world." She hadn't understood it then. Had thought it was the kind of poetic nonsense old men used to avoid explaining things properly. She understood it now. She had been a ghost for 7 months. The corridor noise peaked and faded. She waited another 60 seconds before she moved. The sovereignty ship Voth Ascending Tide was 3 kilometers long, shaped like a flattened vertebra, with weapons bristling from every protrusion. And somewhere in its forward section was the processing hold where they had taken her crew. Yuan Kai had been outside the ship when the ambush hit, doing an EV repair on the Meridian's port thruster, 200 meters away in vacuum, when the Voth interdiction fields had gone live, and the Meridian had simply stopped. No explosion, no fight. The field had reached out like a hand closing around a moth, and the ship had gone dark, and all 23 people she was responsible for had become cargo. She had watched it happen from outside, floating in the dark with a thruster seal in her hand, tethered to nothing. It had taken her 4 hours to cut her way into the ascending tide through a maintenance airlock. The Voth didn't guard their maintenance locks because they had not yet encountered a species that would use one from the outside, in vacuum, without a suit rated for the pressure differential. Human EVA suits, as it turned out, were rated for considerably more than their listed specifications, because humanity had learned long ago that the specifications printed on equipment were starting points for negotiation, not hard limits. She had bled from her ears by the time the lock cycled. The blood had dried. She had ignored it. 7 months. She had learned the ship the way she had once learned forms. First the gross architecture, then the transitions, then the spaces between. The Voth were extraordinary engineers. Their vessel was a marvel of layered redundancy, elegant fail-safes, a circulation system for power and atmosphere that had no single point of failure. They had clearly built it to withstand anything. They had not, in their long and apparently uninterrupted history of conquest, built it to withstand a single human woman who had nothing left to do but learn. She had learned. The processing hold was not a prison, exactly. The Voth did not think in terms of imprisonment. They thought in terms of inventory. The humans were inventory, cataloged, sedated to a low maintenance level, stored in transparent modules stacked floor to ceiling. She had found them on her 3rd week aboard, had stood in the observation gallery above, and looked down at the 23 sleeping faces and felt something move through her that had no name in any language she knew. Grief, not rage. Something that existed below both, a cold and structural thing, like the keel of a ship. She had made herself a promise then, one promise only. All 23, no exceptions. She moved through the lower maintenance ducts. Nows, pulling herself along the ribbed conduit walls with the particular efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. The Voth venting schedule was her clock. Every 90 minutes, the thermal exchangers on Deck 6 flushed their condensate through the secondary returns, creating a 3-minute window of pressure equalization that masked movement sounds throughout the adjacent section. She was on her way to the power junction she had spent 6 weeks carefully modifying, a patience that had cost her, had required her to wait while her crew slept in their modules. And the Voth went about the business of cataloging humanity for transport to whatever came next. She had not let herself think about what came next. She had thought only about the junction. It was in essence a timing problem. Her Sifu had loved timing problems. He had called them the only honest problems, because they could not be argued with or deceived. They simply were what they were, and you either moved when the moment opened, or you missed it forever. The moment was opening tonight. She reached the junction at the 93-minute mark. The thermal flush began with a low harmonic she felt in her sternum, and she pulled the access panel with both hands and swung herself inside. The modification she had made was subtle. A resequencing of the load-balancing logic in the tertiary distribution layer, achieved by physically rerouting 4 fiber conduits through a bypass she had built from salvaged components over the course of 2 months. The Voth diagnostics would read it as a localized efficiency fluctuation. What it actually was a detonator. Not for an explosion. Yuan Kai did not have explosives. What she had was better. She had spent 7 months learning the ascending tide's respiratory system. The way it breathed, where it held its breath, the precise sequence of atmospheric partition events that the ship used to maintain different pressure zones for different Voth crew requirements. The Voth were a 6-limbed species that breathed a nitrogen-heavy mix with elevated CO2 tolerances. Humans breathed differently. Processing hold where her crew slept was maintained at human-compatible atmosphere precisely because living inventory required living atmosphere. What her junction modification would do, at exactly the right moment, was reverse the partition logic for 3 minutes. Flooding the crew corridors with the sedative the Voth pumped into the hold modules at half strength, while simultaneously venting the hold itself to standard circulation. Crew would begin to wake. The Voth patrols would begin to slow. 3 minutes was not very much time. She had run the problem in her head approximately 4,000 times since she had first conceived it. 3 minutes to get from the junction to the processing hold. 3 minutes for her crew to wake enough to move. 3 minutes to get 23 people into the emergency evacuation pods. She had spent 2 months quietly preloading with oxygen, rations, and navigational beacons. The pods were Voth design, single occupancy, built for the 6-limbed crew, which meant they would fit a human being only if that human being did not mind certain indignities of posture. Crew would manage. Her crew had managed worse. The mathematics were brutal. She was one person. The ship had 41 Voth crew members on this watch rotation. There were 4 choke points between the processing hold and the pod bay, and even with the sedative haze, the Voth were large, fast, and armored. She had a length of high-tension cable she had braided herself from salvage wire. Voth plasma cutter she had taken off a maintenance drone 2 months ago, and a hand tool she had modified into something that could discharge a capacitor with enough voltage to make a Voth exosuit's movement system seize for approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds was, she had concluded, enough. It would have to be. She closed her eyes for a moment in the dark of the junction. Sifu's voice came to her, not as memory exactly, but as presence, the way old instruction settles into the body. A ghost does not fight, he had said. A ghost completes. She had always thought that was about restraint. She understood now it was about economy. Every movement with a purpose. No flourish, no waste, no performance. The Voth, for all their engineering brilliance, were performers. Their combat forms were vast and dramatic, full of the sweeping multi-limb strikes that their biology made possible and their aesthetics apparently demanded. They were magnificent. They were also, she had noticed, deeply habituated. They expected resistance to look a certain way. She activated the junction modification. The harmonic of the thermal flush shifted, barely perceptible, a quarter-tone drop in the venting frequency that meant the partition logic was executing. She was already moving. The first choke point was a corridor intersection 60 meters from the hold's secondary entrance. 1 Voth. She heard it before she saw it, the distinctive triple beat of its gate echoing off the curved walls. She counted the rhythm, found the gap between the second and third footfall where its weight was distributed across and its upper arms were occupied with the sensor baton it carried. And she stepped out of the maintenance duct opening directly into its path. At a height, it was not looking. The Voth moved fast. She moved differently. The capacitor tool discharged against the joint, between the exosuit's mid-thorax and its primary locomotion ring. The suit seized. 4 seconds. She was already past it, already at the hold door, her fingers finding the manual override she had identified on her second week aboard, and memorized the way her Sifu had made her memorize forms. Not until you get it right, until you cannot get it wrong. The door opened. The smell hit her first. 23 people breathing recycled air for 7 months. It should have been unbearable. To her it smelled like home. They were waking. Slowly, unevenly, the way people wake from deep sedation. First awareness without context, then context arriving in pieces, the wrong order. She moved between the modules, hitting the manual releases, catching the people who fell because their legs had forgotten what legs were for. She caught Dr. O.C. by the shoulders. He looked at her face for 3 seconds, as if she were something he was trying to remember the word for. Kai, he said finally. Walk, she said. I'll explain later. Walk now. How long? 7 months. Walk, he walked. She moved to the next module. 2 minutes and 30 seconds remaining. She was 9 people in, moving faster now, because the first 9 were helping. Those who could stand were pulling others to standing, passing the instruction down the line with a particular efficiency of people who had worked together long enough to share a nervous system. She had not planned for this. She had planned for 23 individuals in varying states of incapacity. What she had was a crew. She heard the Voth alarm at the 2-minute mark, the slow pulse of a routine alert, the rapid sequence shriek of a response mobilization. They had found the downed patrol. Pod Bay, she said, loud enough to carry. Follow the blue conduit markers on the left wall. Do not stop. Do not look back. Pods are preloaded. The hatches open outward. You buckle in and you hit the yellow tab, just the yellow tab, and the pod does the rest. She paused. Make. A woman near the back of the forming column looked up. Chief Engineer Max Sufan, who had once kept a damaged FTL drive running with a length of copper wire and a theory, looked at Yuan Kai with the sharp eyes of someone whose sedation had burned off faster than most. Pods navigate to the beacon frequency on Channel 7, Yuan Kai said. You know what to do with Channel 7. Max Sufan looked at her for 1 second. Coming. I'll hold the choke points. Kai, move, Fan. That's an order. She turned before she could see Max's expression and put herself between her crew and the corridor that was filling, at the far end, with the sound of Voth movement. Multiple contacts. She counted by footfall. 6, 7, at least 8 exosuits running at combat speed, which was faster than it should have been, faster than anything that large had a right to move. She had the cable and the plasma cutter, and 3 more capacitor charges. She had 7 months of knowing this ship's bones. She breathed out. A ghost does not fight. A ghost completes. She went to work. The first thing she did was not what they expected. The Voth expected a barricade. They expected a defender to stand at the choke point and hold it. She didn't hold it. She went through it, toward them, using the maintenance alcove on the corridor's starboard wall that she had widened by 4 centimeters over the course of 3 weeks, removing 1 rivet at a time from a non-structural panel, creating a space that a 6-limbed Voth in an exosuit could not fit, but a human woman could. She was inside their formation before they had time to reconfigure. The plasma cutter cut a clean arc through the knee joint of the lead suit. The Voth went down, not gracefully. The cable she swung in a 2-handed arc. She had practiced this specific motion 10,000 times in the dark, in the maintenance ducts, until the braid had worn grooves into her palms. And it caught 2 suit joints, simultaneously, locking them together in a configuration the suit's movement logic had no protocol for. They staggered into each other. 4 seconds from the capacitor discharge. She was already moving backward, using the confusion, putting distance between herself and the cluster, while they sorted themselves out. She knew this section of corridor, the way she knew her own face. She knew which panel on the left wall, struck at the right angle, would vent the localized atmosphere from the maintenance crawl behind it, with enough force to fill the corridor with thermal fog. She struck it. The fog was not smoke, it was condensation, hot, dense, and completely harmless. It also completely defeated the Voth's visual sensors for approximately 40 seconds, while their suits recalibrated. She moved. The second choke point was more complicated. 2 Voth had come from the deck above, and were already at the intersection, already oriented toward the pod bay corridor. She could hear her crew behind them, could hear footsteps, human footsteps, moving fast, and she felt something tighten in her chest that was not fear but something adjacent to it, something that lived in the same neighborhood. She came at the 2 Voth from above, dropping from the ceiling conduit junction with the plasma cutter already burning. She was smaller than everything in this ship. She had spent 7 months learning that this was not a disadvantage. She had learned to be exactly as small as the space required. The fight, if it could be called that, lasted 11 seconds. She took a glancing blow from a secondary limb that sent her into the wall, hard enough to gray her vision for a moment. She did not stop. She had made a choice 7 months ago, floating in the dark with blood drying in her ears, that she would not stop. There was no energy available for stopping. Stopping them was for later. She heard the pod bay doors. She heard the Voth behind her. 4 suits, recovered now, running, she ran. The third choke point she did not fight through. She sealed it. A blast door that she had spent 6 weeks studying, learning the manual override sequence that the Voth used during drill cycles, a sequence of 7 contact points activated in order. She hit them at a dead run, palm to contact, and the door came down with a resonance that she felt in her teeth. It would hold for 4 minutes. She ran. The pod bay was chaos and order simultaneously. The particular organized chaos of professionals doing things they know how to do, under conditions they did not expect. She could see people strapped in, pod cycling, the sequential thump of launch charges firing. Mac was at the last pod holding it. "That's 22, Mac said when she saw her. "Go. That's 22 launched. Get in." Yuan Kai got in. The pod was built for a 6-limbed Voth, and she was not, and the geometry was aggressively uncomfortable, and she did not care even slightly. She hit the yellow tab. The launch was a gut punch of deceleration in reverse. 4 seconds of brutal acceleration. Then nothing, the perfect nothing of vacuum. Through the pod's single small viewport she could see the ascending tide receding, its running lights tracking in the dark, and then another ship's lights, and another. Counted the running lights, and found 22 before she lost count. 22 small pods tumbling away from the hull of the Voth ship, like seeds from a broken fruit. 23, all 23. She let herself breathe. The Voth, she would learn later, filed 3 separate incident reports about the ascending tide incursion. The first described a stealth infiltration by an unknown hostile force of undetermined size, estimated at no fewer than 12 operatives, based on the breadth of modifications found throughout the ship's systems. The second revised this estimate upward to 30, based on the complexity of the junction rerouting. Third report, filed by the Voth Ascending Tide's commanding officer 6 standard days after the incident, contained a notation that would be translated, parsed, and debated extensively in the sovereignty's intelligence apparatus for the next 2 years. The notation read, "We have underestimated the duration required for a single member of this species to become dangerous." It was filed under the category header they used for anomalous biological data. The category was called, in their language, a word that translated most closely as ghost. The medical facility on Waystation 14 was not designed for 23 people in simultaneous recovery from 7 months of low-grade sedation. But it managed because medical facilities that serve humanity in the outer transit lanes have learned to manage. Yuan Kai sat on a cot in the corridor because the rooms were full, and let the medic, a young man named Price, with the careful hands of someone who had learned his trade somewhere difficult, work on the damage to her right side. "Rib is cracked, not broken," he said. "The ear damage is healed, but you've got some scar tissue on the left drum. You'll notice it in bass frequencies." "I never liked bass frequencies," she said. Price looked at her for a moment. "You were in there for 7 months." "Yes, alone, yes." He finished wrapping the rib. He was quiet for a while, in the careful way of people deciding whether to say something. "There's going to be a debrief," he said finally. "Command will want the full account, the intelligence value of what you learned about that ship." "I know. They'll want to know how." She thought about the cold courtyard, the horse stance held until her legs shook, the breathing that left no shape, the voice that said, "You are not there," until being nowhere became a thing she actually knew how to do. "I'll tell them everything," she said. "None of it will make sense to them." Price finished his work and stood, and she watched him go. Down the corridor she could hear voices, her crew, awake, finding each other, the specific relief of people who have been alone in their own heads for too long, suddenly remembering that other people exist. Dr. Osi's laugh, which was too loud even under normal circumstances. Mac Sufan's voice, giving someone a calm and precise description of how Channel 7 worked. Mac, cause Mac could not turn the engineering off even here. Yuan Kai sat on the cot and did not laugh or talk. She was still being a ghost a little. It was hard to stop. She looked at her hands. The cable had worn the grooves in her palms smooth. The skin had rebuilt itself over the shape of the braid, adapted to the instrument. Hands had learned the ship, and the ship had left its mark on her hands. And she supposed that was how it always went, that the tools you carry long enough stop being tools and start being part of your body. And you stop being yourself and start being the thing you learned to do. She flexed her fingers, felt the tightness in the scar tissue, felt the memory of the cable's weight. She thought about the Voth incident report, the word they had used. Ghost her Sifu had called it the same thing in a cold courtyard in another century, on a planet that felt now like a photograph of itself. He had meant it differently. He had meant something about presence and absence, about the quality of attention that does not announce itself. She did not think the Voth meant exactly the same thing. But she thought they were getting at something similar. There was a window at the end of the corridor. She could see the stars through it, the familiar scatter of the outer transit lanes. Fainter than the core stars. Cooler, the light of things that were farther away and older. She had floated among for us once, with a thruster seal in her hand, watching, waiting for the thought that would tell her what to do. The thought had not come in words. It had come as a simple arithmetic. 23, 1, therefore. She stood up from the cot, her rib objected. She ignored it, in the practiced way of someone who has spent 7 months ignoring objections. Down the corridor, her crew was finding each other. She walked toward them, not rushing, not announcing herself, just walking the way a person walks when they are going somewhere that matters. Mac Fan saw her first and stopped talking mid-sentence and said nothing at all. Just looked at her with the particular expression of someone recalibrating. Then Dr. Osi said her name, and the room rearranged itself around her. And people who had been asleep for 7 months while she kept watch over them reached for her, and she let them. And she was present for it in the way she had not been present for anything in 7 months. Solid, located, warm. A body in a room among bodies. She had promised herself. All 23. She looked around and counted 23. She was still a ghost, a little. She thought she might always be, but she could also count, and the count was right. And that was enough. The debrief lasted 11 hours over 4 sessions. She told them everything, as she had said she would. The junction modification, the atmospheric partition reversal, corridor fights, reconstructed with the clinical precision of someone who had mentally rehearsed each one hundreds of times. The blast door sequence, the maintenance alcove she had widened 3 centimeters over 3 weeks, thermal fog panel. She told them about the ghost breath and the horse stance and the voice in the cold courtyard, and they wrote some of it down and not others. Commander Adisa, who ran the debrief, leaned back in her chair at the end of the 4th session and looked at the ceiling for a long time. The Voth estimated 12 operatives minimum, she said. Rise to 30. I know, you were alone. Yes, Adisa looked at her directly. How does a person spend 7 months as the only living human on a hostile ship and come out functional? Yuan Kai thought about the question. She thought about it the way she would have thought about a timing problem. Honestly, without decoration. You don't come out functional, she said. You come out shaped. It's different. Adisa wrote something down. The intelligence you've provided on the ascending tide alone is worth. I know what it's worth, Yuan Kai said. I'm not done. Adisa looked up. Have 7 months of the ship's layout, personnel schedules, power distribution logic, and atmospheric system architecture in my head, Yuan Kai said. I have modification techniques that work on Voth maintenance systems without triggering their diagnostics. I have timing data on patrol rhythms for this class of vessel, and I have direct observational data on how the Voth respond to human pattern resistance. She paused. I'm not done. The room was quiet. What do you want? Adisa said. I want the same crew, Yuan Kai said. I want the meridian repaired, and I want to go back. No one spoke for a moment. The ascending tide. Someone started. Not the ascending tide, Yuan Kai said. The ascending tide is a ship. There are others. There are processing holds on each of them. She thought about the modules stacked floor to ceiling, the sleeping faces, the arithmetic. There is always someone sleeping in the dark, waiting for someone to count them. Adisa looked at her for a long time. You understand that what you did was, by any rational assessment, impossible, she said. It wasn't impossible, Yuan Kai said. It just took a long time. She flexed her fingers, felt the cable's shape in the scar tissue. I had a long time. Outside the debrief room, the way station went about its business. The particular human business of keeping things running in difficult conditions, of managing the improbable and the inconvenient and the things that should not work but do. Ships came and went. Engineers argued about specifications. Someone, somewhere, was doing an EVA repair on a thruster in vacuum with a seal that had been rated for more than its listed specs. Yuan Kai walked out of the debrief room and stood in the corridor for a moment, alone with the stars in the window at the end. 23, she thought. It was a starting number. She went to find her crew.